So, hey, everybody, good to have you with us. It is June 9th, 2022, and I'm Daniel, Foor, probably got that. And the question tonight, the guiding intent for the talk is when we're in the midst of big change, what helps us to navigate that? We'll unpackage it a bit. There'll be time for an experiential practice. There'll be time for a few questions or shares, and then that'll be about an hour. Before we dive into the teachy bit, I want to say briefly a few things that are happening with ancestral medicine. There's a course that starts next week, a short course called Care for the Dead and Dying. So if you imagine you'll die someday, or you know other people who might die, it's really pragmatic skills on how to navigate that in a skillful, conscious way. And the practitioner training is open if you want a career in helping people work out their ancestral stuff. That's an option. And the Ancestral Lineage Healing course, which is our most popular course and is how to work out your own ancestral stuff, that opens tomorrow, I think. And the summer season of the initiations course, A Life of Ritual, is focusing on life as initiatory process. That will open again soon for the summer as well. And finally, we have the Animist Psychology course open in a self-paced way. So if you're interested in the intersection of psychology, psychotherapy, and ritual and the spirits and all that stuff, then that's a course about that. So those are some things happening. You're welcome to check those out. And back to the regularly scheduled talk on big change. So sorry, it's a heavy topic, so it's important to bring a little bit of levity to it, maybe. But the question is like, what helps when we're in big transformative stuff? Well, for one, like, who am I to talk about that? To situate myself briefly, because some of you may have never heard me say anything before. Down lineage from early English and German settler colonialist folks to North America. And as I mentioned, I live in Western North Carolina with my family here. And I wasn't raised with any kind of religious stuff, but I sought out spiritual teachings and traditions, and also did a lot of training in psychology, and have studied history and culture a bit. So does that qualify me to talk about change? I don't know. I mean, I'm a dad of two young girls, so that's something intense, kind of. And I've done some initiations in the usual traditional initiatory, like scripted, we're going to initiate you into a thing kind of initiatory things, which is give us some perspective on it. But, I'm winging it like everybody else. So I've been around ritual a lot. And I think ritual has things to bring to the conversation that are important, as does psychology. So in that sense, I feel at least qualified to open a conversation. And so what do we mean when we say big change? Why am I talking about this, right? A lot of big change is unsolicited, right? You get a diagnosis of an illness suddenly, or somebody you love dies, or your neighboring country invades your country, or etc. Like big change that is not pleasant and you didn't solicit comes to your life. It also can be change that you set in motion or you embrace on some level. Like you're having a baby, or it's a big move, or you just got a big promotion or something, and it's great. It's what you wanted. And you realize all these other things in your life are going to change now in a big way. Or it could be so many things. You go through a separation. You chose to separate, but now you're in the actual separation. So sometimes we choose it, sometimes we don't. But there are things that can be kind of common to those types of processes, right? That's what I want to explore. And the tension that I see around it is like, how much do we try to control it a little bit compared to being in a state of surrender? Because I think either extreme is, at the one extreme, we're just blown out and we're not even navigating at all. It's like we're kind of closing our eyes in the boat. And at the other, we're trying to control it too much. And we're just making ourselves tired and stressing the world out because we can't control it that much. So what I want to say is 3 general principles. And with each of those, unpackage it a little bit. And basically, the 3 principles are like, work with the actual conditions you're in. Get and remember that it's also you that's changing, not just the conditions. And finally, like container, 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 tend to the container. And so with the first, when I say work with the actual conditions, a common thing here is that when you're in a big transformative process, your ability to regulate what's going on is either less or kind of out the window. I think of this, it's not quite the same, but I think of times where I accidentally took too much psychoactive something, and I'm not in the range where it's actually useful and you're kind of on a medicine and you can still remember your name, but you get out of that range and you're like, what is going on? I'm kind of scared and nothing makes sense, and I'm just going to need to wait this out and not like do anything big. So it's a dramatic example of being in a state where you're flooded. Like if you get really big news, like overwhelming news that's very scary, threatening, like typically you're not in a place where you can like keep up. The sense is reality is moving faster than you can keep up with. And that is common to a lot of different states. It's common to like not just psychoactive experiences, but like a psychotic break. It's common to having a big spiritual opening. It's common to just like major unexpected trauma or good news or anything. So it can be it for a lot of reasons. But if we anchor it in a physical body kind of parallel, most of the feedback loops on a body level are negative feedback loops. It means that if something starts moving in one direction, the overall system will want to bring it back into balance. If you start bleeding, your body's usual instinct is like, hey, we should stop that bleeding. Or like you start to get a fever, you get overheated, the body's like, let's do some sweating. We need to like cool it off, or whatever it is. Like most of our life is moving through negative feedback loops, meaning that we seek a state of homeostasis. We're trying to get back to balance. That is accompanied psychologically by feelings of being in control, which is, I mean, control has a bad rap when you like in spiritual circles, it's like, don't be controlling, but like being like in control of basic functioning is kind of nice and kind of important and really settling and nice for feeling safe, right? And so occasionally there are really so-called natural processes like it's normal functioning where there's a positive feedback loop. And it's a great example of this kind of process I'm talking about. In the body, the most striking positive feedback loop is giving birth. And when birth actually starts, I know there can be like, false starts and whatnot, but when it's actually time and the body sets a number of things in motion. I mean, there are like, for example, one of the amazing physiological things about birth is relaxin as a hormone that actually loosens the joints and cervix and different, like it relaxes the connective tissues of the body to allow for birth to happen. And like metaphorically, when there's big change in our life, like bring the relaxin a bit in the sense that there's a recognition that something big needs to move. And if we're fighting it, it's going to be harder. It's not necessarily going to stop the big process, but it's not necessarily moving with things in the way they're going. Like, so if you relate with physical birth or a birth-like process in your life, as if it's a negative feedback loop and you're trying to get back to homeostasis, you're fighting what is. You haven't recognized, oh, this is that other kind of process. Damn, like I didn't schedule this in, but apparently I'm now in that kind of process. So clear the schedule because this is what's happening. And just that difference, where we shift our way of being with what is from a stance of trying to reestablish control to a stance of, okay, what's happening? What is required of me here? Where do I have leverage? Where do I not have the leverage? And what's the plan? Because it's different than just being in control. That basic awareness of having a framework, that's the first suggestion, is like learn to recognize those processes in your life and other people's lives. Because someone might come to you and they're like, I'm freaking out. And you can see and they can see that this is a change that has been brewing for a long time. Maybe they're in an unhappy marriage and it's like, oh my God, like we're actually going to get divorced now. And you see, it's like, oh, this is like you're in a positive feedback loop. You don't get to go back to, it's too late. You don't get to put that old reality back. And so the way of moving is different now. There's a different plan. And so that's kind of the second suggestion, besides recognize there's a difference, is like, don't try to impose the control, and recognize that almost always in a positive feedback loop, things, instead of becoming more calm, they become more intense. And the only way is through. It's not back to where you were. Where you were isn't there anymore. It's the same with initiatory work. Like you're in, I've also supported it, multi-day initiatory things ritually. And somebody might be like, they took a trip somewhere, they set this up, they've been planning for it. It's like a big deal. And they did the prayer ties, they shaved their head, they did, whatever, they did the things you need to do. And now they're like 2 days into a 3, 4, 5 day thing, and they're freaking out. And it's like, you can't go back to where you were. You can't just you can't turn around. Then it's going to get really weird and really kind of dangerous. You got to move through it. It's the only way through. And so that's humbling and scary when you're in that place. So if you're in it, another thing to remember is just be kind with yourself, and to be kind with other people who are freaked out. Because when things are moving fast, and there's catalytic change, the level of control is a lot less, especially for folks for all kinds of understandable reasons, sometimes because of trauma, whatever. The feeling of not being in control is very, very uncomfortable, very scary. So kindness around that. A third suggestion around this, of just recognizing these two different kinds of processes, is one of the things we can do, and this is actually really helpful, I think, is tell the truth about what is happening in the moment. Our speech is, in a lot of ways, our primary ritual tool, and it is a way that we can either create dissonance or like curse people, or bring congruence and blessing and like connect the world by speaking truth. And so when you're freaked out, one of the best things you can do is say, I am freaking out. It brings a kind of congruency. And it doesn't mean you're not scared anymore. And you might need to say, like, I am really scared. I need help. I'm confused. It's very uncomfortable. Oh my God, what's happening? But using, like, it's possible to use your speech to get yourself more stirred up, of course, but being able to speak can be really settling. And it's a way of using the little bit of leverage we often do have in a good way. And we can use our speech to do things like say, I pray that this works out okay. I'm scared, but I pray to trust in the process. I pray that my ancestors and God and the earth hold me. Like I'm scared, and I pray to remember what brought me here. For example, there's a way of just like remembering your baseline intent and telling the truth about your experience. What it also does is it takes the sometimes younger parts of us that are like, what is going on? I'm not safe. And it settles them a little bit because at least there's someone, um, an adult at the wheel. Like you might be in a scary situation with kids and be like, you need to do exactly what I say. Like, we're in danger. I'm here. Listen to me. Focus. And for kids, it's like, okay, like someone is steering. Great. Okay. So there's a, like that. Using our speech can be a way of focusing energy that's different than controlling everything. Just a way of gathering ourselves up, right? So that can help. Take a minute before I say more things, if you would, and just pause and notice how what we're speaking to already is landing. I don't mean to suggest that all big change and transformation is inherently scary or destabilizing, but sometimes even the good change can be that way. The change is really wholesome. And I don't know how it is for you all, but if it's anything like how it was for me, like 0 people ever helped me, at least in the first 20 years of my life, to have any orientation to what the hell to do with any of this. And so it's not like something culturally we tend to talk about. And yet all of us are scheduled to have, like, people die, we're going to die, stuff's going to happen, you know? Okay. So that's the main principle of, like, recognize that there are fundamentally different kinds of states that call for different things. Most states inherently track back toward regulation, but occasionally there are states where they need to get more intense and more dysregulated before they settle. A second big thing of 3 is that um, we can think about change like something that's happening to us, or something that, you know, is happening in the world around us, or is changing of our circumstances. But a lot of times when it's really big transformative stuff, um, the distinction between you and the world around you gets a little blurred, because it's also you that's changing. It's not just like my circumstances are changing. It's like, no, you're actually changing. And this tends to be really like in before and after kinds of moments. And to anchor it in another, like, physical world parallel, especially insects and amphibians to different degrees undergo metamorphosis on biological level. And what's interesting about it, for one, there's a couple things here, is take insects. I happen to know them more, even though we've tried raising tadpoles from a local like puddle that was going to dry up here with the girls. And but insects, think of dragonflies, for example. Like, dragonflies are awesome. Who doesn't like dragonflies? If you've noticed the first part of their life, you may not have, less people know this, they're ferocious aquatic insects, like kind of like bigger than most of the other aquatic insects. And they just like tear it up in the streams and will eat up the other water creatures. And they look really less cuddly than their flying later stage of life. And like a lot of insects, like you might like honeybees, they're very sacred, they're very magical. The first part of their life, which is not a short phase of life, they're a larva. And you might like mistake them for like a maggot if you saw them. They're less easy to idealize as a magical creature. But nonetheless, that is part of their life cycle and who they are. It's like that with a lot of different insects. And the period where they get from stage 1, larva, aquatic thing, whatever it is, tadpole, even same principle to stage 2. That in between stage is quick, and it is accompanied by a lot of rapid structural hormonal change. Like they're plugging along, growing as a caterpillar, and then it's like caterpillar mush, butterfly, vulnerable butterfly emerging, and then butterfly for a while. But that in between stage, it's quick, it's vulnerable, it's messy. And it's a great way of understanding how it is for the humans as well. That there are times where like you, I don't know how it is for the dragonfly nymph per se, but we get a story about who we are. We work at that story. We kind of like build it up, and it's like, it's like my identity. And you kind of like trick it out and get comfortable and do what you need to do to have a sense of self. And then when a big transformative whatever comes along, it's actually very threatening, because it's like, hey, your soul is here, and it's like, you got to do some growth. So we got to get from point A to point B. And it's not like a long, spacious hike. It's like, this is going to be uncomfortable because we need to replace a few core things about your identity. So sorry, here we go. And so that time where things really reorganize, on some level, it's almost like it's a compassionate thing that it happened quickly, like resetting a bone or something. It's better that it be quick. But if we don't have any framework for that, we might fight it, and we might not have any context on what's going on. You don't, like, if you don't know that this is the kind of thing that happens to everybody, ideally. If we resist it, what happens is we lead a contracted, fearful, stuck life. Ooh, who wants that? Nobody wants that. Nobody would sign up for that on purpose. But to not get that life, you have to have enough courage to be like, oh my goodness, big transformative something is happening, and at least not fight it too hard so it can happen. The suggestion that for me feels relevant here is there's a deeper layer to the organism that is neither tadpole nor frog. There's who we were and who we're becoming, and the really messy, vulnerable period of time in between the two. And then there's a strata beneath all of it that we could think of as a soul or the spirit or the older layers of what we are, perhaps the multi-lifetime layers of what we are. And if we can remember that and even access that just a little, it'll help the process along, because we won't be as convinced that we're dying or psychologically dying, because all this stuff we're talking about is kind of practice for literal death. And we'll be able to surrender a little more easily into it. I'm thinking about my own life and trying to like place this as an example so it's not so abstract. I remember when I was 17, I think, in second suburban Ohio, and had been doing my own therapy a little bit, but it was even before that actually, but it became clear to me from something a friend had said, that I was like, oh, all this like stuff I had heard about people being gay, bisexual, like other than straight. I'm like, oh, that's me. Like that applies to me. I'm like, oh shit, like this is suddenly very real and very vulnerable. And what I saw at the time is basically, it wasn't like this clear, but it's like two roads. It's like you can either face this and take a deep breath and just come out as messy as it is, and you figure it out from there, or not. But if you don't do it, it's going to haunt you. You're going to not like it that much, and then you have to do it later. It was this real feeling of like, this is what you got to do now. And that clicked into place quickly. And then I'm just like, oh damn, now I have to do that, to like go upstairs and tell my parents and all that. And I think of it as an example because in retrospect, I can have a generous view of where I was at, and that it's that some older part of my being was present enough to just be like, this is your only interesting choice. Like there's who I've been, and then there's where I need to get to, and there's all the messy disorganization, identity, death, rebuilding in between. But this older layer is like, sorry, man, like that's your only interesting choice. Choose that one. Like, okay. So notice if you're freaking out, or if other people are freaking out, if you can help them to contact even a little the layer beneath all that, that's quiet. And it's like, oh yeah, we scheduled this, we called it in. That doesn't apply as much when like random violence or like structural oppression or things that are just like cultural harms and badness intersect your life. It's not like, oh, I scheduled that transformation. That view doesn't apply there. That's a harmful view to hold in those situations. But when it's a kind of personal growth transformation, I think it does apply more. And the other suggestion with the second point of like, you're changing, it's not just things around you, is that one thing we can do is fall back on our core values. And what I mean by this is like, suddenly your visibility, when you're going through big change, you know, like snakes, when they're going to molt, or reptiles, their eyes get really clouded over because they're also going to molt. There are some things over their eyes as well. And when we're in a big transformative process, our clarity is really reduced typically. We might have moments of like, this is the big vision, but then we're back in it. And often it's just confusing. And like more than average, if you're someone who's like, yeah, I got this together, and that's how you like to move in the world, initiatory process and transformation is going to be very unpleasant, because it is not at all about having it together. And what we can do, though, is basically in the fog, in the low visibility space of being in it, where you're neither your caterpillar mush dreaming of butterflies, you can basically say, I affirm my commitment to love and wisdom and kindness and justice. Like I can't see anything. I'm not even sure who I am today, really, but I align with compassion and goodness. However that is for you. That's, assuming you have some core values, fall back on them, even if you have no visibility, because that's your invisible compass. It's practice for death too. Because when we die, we're not going to necessarily remember all the, like our personality is a not if it's shattered, but is impacted when we die, let's say, because a lot of it ends up being body based. But so how do we navigate, 10, 20, 70 days after death? What are you navigating by? What's your compass? I think if we have lived in a way that our choices in the world reflect our values, then they get imprinted more deeply, because there's a kind of congruency. Like we're actually reinforcing our values with our concrete choices. When we do that, and then death comes, we will tend to navigate it pretty well instinctively, because the imprint has been made already. And so it doesn't matter if we forget the details, we made the imprint. But whether or not we're there, it's that same practice of saying, well, I don't have any access to the details and the content of what's happening. Like, I'm not sure where this is headed. I can't inhabit who I've been, and who I'm becoming is not emerged yet. So I'm the hermit crab between shells. nonetheless, I'm like, okay, meditate. Where's the next shell? So you have to fall back on your values, not in an abstract way, but in a like, I want what is kind and good in the world. I'm a caring person. I want a world that is friendly to love and kindness. I know that much. Oh, that means I need to turn left here or whatever. So you take it one step at a time. Yeah. The last key thing I would say is that the container really matters for big transformative stuff. And I don't mean to be too abstract here, but I mean that if we look at structured ritual, initiatory process like rites of passage, and there are different kinds of initiations, but the ones that are trying to just mature someone along on a soul level, not necessarily like initiate you to the mystery of the volcano or something more specific, but just trying to cook adults, right? Those initiations pretty much always have a group of people involved. So there's a human container of people who are bearing witness to the change. And there are also ritual parameters. There are practices. There's a start and end to the process. There's a container, right? And they're like a controlled detonation of a process that would happen anyways, but it's being given an outlet instead of just being a chaotic, unstructured life initiation, which is harder because there's no container to it. Often, if there's a sudden tragedy and the community is responding well, whether or not they have any particular worldview, that doesn't matter. I'm not talking about religion. What will happen is the community will respond as a collective organism, as if a part of its own body has been injured. And so there's like an immune response where it's like, oh my God, what do you need? Let us cook you food. Let us hold you. Who's taking care of this? Can we make the arrangements? Do you need a GoFundMe? Like, what do you need? You don't even need to know what you need. Let us just do it. Like that response where people come in, they're spontaneously creating a container for a catalytic change. It's very instinctively healthy. It's what we ideally do as communal beings when someone is in the vulnerable condition that who they were is no longer available and who they're going to become is not available yet either. So they need held in a container. But unless you happen to be going through a really well-structured, multi-day, communally held initiatory process, which may you have access to that if you want it. It does exist. It's not the norm. The norm these days is chaotic life unfolding, winging it initiations. So we do our best. What you can do instead is improvise your container. And ways to improvise a container, and all of these are better than no container, look like calling friends and be like, I'm freaking out. I need help a lot right now. Please come over. Or, hey, ancestor spirits, guides, deities, whoever you pray to, it's game on. I need you now. Like, this is a moment. You got to show up. Help. I send out a request, blank check, help me now. Distress flare. So you ask for help. Maybe you also have the wherewithal to cancel your appointments or clear your schedule and be like, I'm going to need food and I'm going to need space, or whatever it is. You recognize that you're going to have to improvise a shelter, so to speak. Like a storm is suddenly coming. You didn't see it coming. You're like, okay, improvise now. So you start journaling, you start calling in help, and you pray basically in whatever form. You're like, may the big old powers who are friendly to me hold me through this, please. Like, I recognize I'm vulnerable and there's a big thing happening and I don't understand it that well. So help. That, even just that, is a way of instinctively improvising a makeshift container that will hold you together a bit more than if you didn't have it. because the risk is that we're going to fracture. There, we all have a breaking point on a physical level, psychological level, and it's true on a soul or spirit level too. Like each one of us has a breaking point, and you never, like, may we not find it, you know? Nobody wants that, but conditions might bring us to that edge. And if it happens, there are ways to try to bring about healing after, but it's better to not shatter. Like shattering is different than a transformative. It's a different thing than the caterpillar becoming the butterfly. The metamorphosis is kind of like that's a big transformative, so-called normal process. The shattering, because the container didn't hold, that happens too, but it's ideal to avoid it if we can. And any amount of extra buffering we can bring in will increase our, like, the range of tolerance. It'll increase what we can weather without shattering. Like if we have people holding us and showing up for us, be like, you got this, I love you. Like we're doing ritual all day, like 15 people, we got our candles lit, we're praying for you, whatever it is, you can do this, I'll be over there to bring you dinner. That will allow what you can endure to be greater than if you didn't have that. So the more container you can have, the better. And we can improvise it a bit, because almost nobody's dealing in a really healthy cultural environment where you have a ton of support and everybody's like doing ritual all day long, and it's a fantasy. Most people don't have that. So we have to wing it. I did a lot of therapy with kids for a couple years. It's been years ago now, but I was always like, man, is this really helping? The systems they're embedded in are so dysfunctional, and the school system's so dysfunctional. But so I didn't want to work in that way long term, even though it's sacred work. But what was the way I kind of comforted myself, I guess, is to say that I don't really know how, like, I could have brought for those kids like 2% more resilience that year, just a tiny bit more. But that tiny bit more might have made it might have made all the difference. It might have been just enough to get them through with a lot of stress, but not a fracturing. Because the fracturing is best avoided. Yeah, that's when the initiatory process is greater than the vessel to hold it, or it's greater than the psychic vessel of the person as well. So yeah, don't break the, we don't want to be broken in that way, right? So to recap, like, recognize that there are different kinds of processes, and recognize that we're going to change as well. It's not just the stuff around us, and try to attend to the container if you can. Those are things we can all do even when we're in the thick of it. And what I'd like to do, because I don't want to just monologue, and I know we're already at 40 minutes in, is take maybe 10 minutes for a little bit of direct practice. And the invitation here will just be to take some of what we've been talking about and to apply that in a gentle reflection form on your own life. I'm not trying to make a big thing happen. It's just a way of shifting the energy into a more reflective mode. I'll talk you through it. Of course, follow your sense if you want to engage or not. Go ahead and start by bringing your attention just to your heart and your belly and your feet. Like, be present in your body. Maybe get settled with your breath, whatever it is. And while that's happening, just notice who's already with you by way of spiritual support. Maybe you call in one of the powers that you know and trust, ancestor, deity, connection to the earth, God, however it is, but resource a little in the ones that support you. And take a minute and ask that your personal space be clear and free from any interference, and just that you be in a protected kind of space. And from that place of being rooted in your body, connected to support, clear, protected, I want to invite you to reflect on a transformative time in your life that's already basically complete, like nothing that's super recent. Something has happened before, a big something that doesn't have a ton of energy for you right now. Like it feels kind of safe and regulated to think about it. So take a moment and notice what you might want to reflect on for a minute. And whatever that is, if you're not sure, you can kind of just choose something. It's all right. See if you can hold a feeling of compassion towards your earlier self. Like you're coming from the future to bring kindness and understanding to your earlier self. So see if you can access that, um, yeah, compassion and kindness energy towards yourself. And I'm going to speak through the different suggestions. And the invitation here is to notice. It's almost like you're noticing if you understood this at the time. And if you didn't, it's like the future coming to communicate to the you back then. And so the first is like, did you understand that you were in a big transformative process? Maybe you did. Good for you if you did. If you didn't, see if you can bring this sense of like kindness and like settling and reassurance to who you were then. And notice if you felt at the time like you really needed to control what was going on, or if you were able to kind of roll with it and surrender a bit. Either way, bring that frame of kindness and acceptance to who you were then from who you are now. Be curious from this place of just viewing your life and whatever you're thinking about in a kind way. Be curious when you were going through whatever it was. Were you able at the time to speak the truth about it, to speak your truth? Did you have your voice at the time or not so much? Either way is okay, but um, it's like you're beaming curiosity to who you were in the spirit of like your voice and your experience is sacred and welcome. Be curious if you'd like, when you were going through it, did some part of you have a conscious awareness of this deeper, older, more stable layer of what you were? Like the soul that's orchestrating the change? Or not so much? It's okay if you didn't, but you bring that awareness now. You just see yourself at the time and you see these bigger layers of what you were also moving. And while you're holding yourself in this state of love and compassion, like, oh, you were going through a thing. You don't have to be in control. It's okay to speak your truth. There's a bigger magic at work. Did you at the time have a sense of your own values? Like, were you able to steer a little bit or have your one paddle in the river and navigate according to what's really authentic for you about your values? Or were you just too flooded? It's okay either way. Be curious about it. And finally, did you have a container for what you were going through? Were you held by the humans, by the systems, by the spirits? And if not, did you instinctively try to create it for yourself? It's okay if not, but just notice even how your compassion through time right now is a kind of container for who you were then. And take a moment before shifting attention away from that reflection to just like hold a sense of appreciation for what you've lived, a sense of like kindness and self respect and self love for how, life's hard and how you're still here. Before we shift out of a state of practice, uh, if it feels right, it's a good moment to affirm right now your intent to navigate big change, whether you're in it now or you just know it's going to come back, to navigate it in a way that you stay a bit connected to yourself, connected to your values and your voice. And finally, see if you can access a sense of compassion from your own center for all the big movement in the world right now, like the change that others in your life are going through, people dying or getting born right now, people just feeling rocked today, and then the bigger earth that we're all living through the changes of right now. So just a sense of uh, empathy and compassion for how many people are also in it. And staying with that, if you wish, at your own pace, will shift attention out of the practice space. If it helps you to thank the ones you called in a little bit at the start, that's fine. And if you want to just hang out and where you're at, that's fine too. I'll start to speak in a different way now. Make space for a question or two. And I do want to underscore a little bit the very last thing I was pointing to, which is that the whole world, the Earth, the planetary system, and the way we've arrived after such a long, long journey as humans and as life more generally, and as this planet, we've arrived at a point where we're in a positive feedback loop. I mean, I kind of wish we weren't, in terms of some of it is self-inflicted catastrophe from selfish choices by a certain number of humans, and that sweep everybody up in problematic systems. But also, there's just a lot of people, and there's a lot of earth changes happening driven by the people. And so we're going to be in that for at least if things go awesome, at least another 100 years. And so definitely all of our lives, and if you have kids, all of their lives, something like that. And we can't live in constant nervous system freakout and expect to have a life that includes being in touch with joy and playfulness and levity and like the things that ideally we hang out in a fair amount. So there's a need to like recognize on some level, oh yeah, the world's freaking out a bit. Not all of the world, but a lot of the systems are freaking out, and we're in crisis. And that doesn't have to mean we live in that state. Things might happen where you don't have a choice. To some degree, it's a question of privilege if you're able to disengage from it. But also, it's a choice to not intentionally keep yourself spinning in the nervous system hyperarousal, right? And to recognize you're not abandoning the world if you regulate your own nervous system and state a bit. Perhaps you're even supporting the transformation by becoming the container for it, rather than being ground zero for the cooker itself, Like we'll all have our turn being in the, transformative vortex energy. We don't have to intentionally live in it all the time. So it feels important to add. Somebody asked a question. It's a perceptive question. I figured it would come out. How do you know if you're having a shattering? What are the signs of that? And I would say, how do you tell the difference between that and a just regular intense kind of process? My sense is you don't really know until later. Other people around you might have a sense of like, oh, you're fracturing. This isn't like not in the way that this initiation ideally calls for. Can we tap the brakes? Like, let's break the fast early, or whatever needs to happen. But when you're the one who's going through it, you're not really going to know until later. And if you're experiencing fracturing, it's because you've arrived at a point where you're flooded and you're overwhelmed. And at that point, the question of, oh, is this fracturing or just regular transformative process? It doesn't, is abstract. In that moment, the question won't help you very much. You just need to call in as much support as you can and mitigate the damage later. And because it is possible to have healing later, of course. And so even if that happens after death, because death is just a big transformative process, you know, and scary as it is, but the consciousness doesn't end. So just on to the next thing. So we're not going to know, really, I don't think. I guess a way to say is like, take inventory after a major transformative process if all your parts are there. That's a good practice, because then you'd be like, oh, I lost, like, some of the things needed to go, but also I got so freaked out. There's like an inner child part of me that's still hiding, you know, under the bed in the house where I grew up in. Let's address that. So you might need to collect yourself after a big change. Yeah. But you're not going to know when you're in it. I don't think. I think it's unrealistic. Yeah. I know we're almost at time. Is there anyone who has a really like a question from the heart that you want to speak into the space? I just feel like it's good to make space for it if possible. It's all right too. Just thinking, yeah, people are asking the, you know, different versions of the same question about the shattering and the. Let me go to Kintry, I think it is. Oops. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just hoping this question helps more than just me, but for those of us that are living in the post, like we definitely had a shattering and we're living in the post of that, and we have some regulation on board, but you know, there's the distinct who I was before and who I am now, and the loss of functioning and the disease process that entered in and all that kind of stuff. Are there a like top couple things that are priority to do? Like there's grieving to do, there's soul retrieval. It seems like there's so much to do after the shattering. Do you have anything to say about that? Like, what are the best things to focus on?
Well, yeah, I think it's good to let at least half of your practice be the cultivation of like profound self-acceptance and this sense that you're already whole and complete as you are. Even if you're like dismembered Osiris and you have 14 parts of you all over the land and the earth and the sky, it's all right. You're like, yeah, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it's dissociative. Sure, I'd be happier and healthier if I was pieced back together. And yes, I'll do the practices. But my practice right now is being really, really okay with things just how they are. Even if you're in chronic pain, even if there's systemic injustice, you're not endorsing it. You're not endorsing the conditions if you take a break from fighting them. That's actually very strategic. And so ideally, your practices of soul retrieval and EMDR and mindfulness meditation and good yoga and eating broccoli and everything that you're supposed to do, which are good things to do. Ideally, they arise from this energy of like, oh, like things are just like okay as they are. Now, yeah, sure, I'm going to sit. I'm going to do some meditation now. Or yeah, I'm happy to welcome more layers of what I am back. May they be welcomed into the spirit of things being okay as they are. And eventually, I think you can even get to a place. I mean, I'm kind of an anxious person, and there are moments where I'm like, I am so fucking anxious. Like, is something deeply wrong in the world, or am I just anxious? And I don't always know. But like, if I'm in that, there are moments where I can also be like, I am very anxious. And that's okay. It's not like I need to be okay in order to get this anxiety to stop. It's like the anxiety is happening, and that's okay. There's a bigger pasture in which the anxiety is happening. There's a little tornado in the field. That's okay. So if you can have that thing, that'll help with all that other to-do list. It won't feel it, because with the to-do list, you create the story that you're going to be okay in the future, and then it never comes. So you got to be okay right now. You know, you're probably not at risk of being like slothful and lazy. Be like, oh, I was practicing being okay right now so much that I forgot to like do any growth work. Probably not. If you're asking that question, you're not going to have that problem. So good. Um, Maybe just one more question, and we'll wind out. I saw Lynn. Yeah. Are you able to unmute there, Lynn?
Here we are.
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
I just like to say that about having a container, relatives, neighbors, friends, I've seen a lot in my life that people live in that and don't learn about being with themselves and being fine alone, that everything about what's good in life is about who you know and who you're with. And so I haven't had a life like that. I haven't had a life like that.
Sure.
But I have prayed, may there be enough. May there be enough of that.
Hmm.
But I'm sitting here in England and I'm hearing Zulu names and places. And I'm so grateful that being alone, I could develop a capacity around going through the window of death without fear and having relationship with spirit guide and spirits. And yeah, it's been a long, hard journey. It's been lovely to be with you this evening. Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks.
But
Thank
I just saying being alone.
you.
Like
Yeah,
who's
yeah.
to
Sometimes what people mean when they say alone is giving less attention to other living humans to be able to attune to the less readily visible web of relationships that includes the ancestors, the spirits, the deities, the old powers that hold up life, etc. And so if in that sense what we mean is alone, then it's not alone at all, of course. And there is also a kind of sacred solitude. I'm not saying it all always has to be relational all the time, but like if your neighbors and friends and social network reinforce who you've been, and then you're headed into a transformative process, and they're like, oh, they're like, don't die or don't change, then they're actually not. They're the opposite of a container. They're not in that moment. They're not functioning with the level of flexibility that allows you, like the container, like in a rite of passage, the people holding the container for like an adolescent to become a young adult, they're not like, hey, don't grow, like you shouldn't like go through this rite of passage, or like, well, you need to stay a kid. They're like, we are over here holding this seat for who you're becoming. It's your job to come over and sit in it, but we're going to witness it, but you got to do it. So the container in that way is holding the vision of our potential that we haven't yet inhabited. If we can have humans that hold that for us, that's a gift. But certainly humans can create a drag on the system, in which case so-called solitude, also known as connecting with all the powers directly, oh yeah, that's definitely a better option. Yeah.
yes, and loving the whole of humanity. Even, having a sense of the one humanity even if one-to-one relationships could be difficult,
For
just
sure.
to have
Yeah.
that recognition of the human condition and the well-being of all.
Hmm. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
good. Yeah, I follow. Thank you.
yeah,
Thank you
thank
for
you.
your shared. Um, I'll I'll say we'll wrap in just a minute, but there's one question I do want to respond to before we totally wind out. But briefly, just a reminder that there's a short course starting next week on how to help other people, help yourself when there's death happening or dying or approaching death, end of life. A lot of those principles apply to transformative stuff as well. So it's a little bit similar to what we're exploring here. And then we have other offerings. The Ancestral Healing course is coming up. And the other big course is the Initiations course, and the practitioner training is open for applications. That starts in the fall if you want to professionally help people with the dead. And the Animus Psych course is open. That's what we got cooking at Ancestral Medicine at the moment. And the last question that I wanted to speak to, and also a perceptive one, is any suggestions if you recognize you're in a transformative process and you actually need to speed it up a little bit, and that I don't know if you need to, but you recognize, all right, the move is not to resist it, but to go with it. Usually, it's probably better to not do that because transformative processes are overseen by big complex powers that know what the rhythm is. So usually you don't have to manage it at all, but just mostly stop fighting it. But if someone gives instruction, do this, do that, lean back, lean forward, whatever, and it's good advice, then sure, go with the parameters of what's there. But if there's a vision you could hold for it, it's something like asking the reality that's coming online, asking the what's emergent to steer you in. It's not, I haven't lived it obviously on a body level, but having been present at some births, I know that for some people giving birth, they have the experience of needing to go retrieve or collect their child from the other world in spirit before the physical birth can fully play out. In that way, it's a enacting of this, okay, this is the reality that's going to be. I step into this and with my whole, like with all the layers of what I am, and bring this person into the world through my body. That kind of move. But it's a partnering with the reality that's coming online and taking the directives from the control tower in that way. You're like, okay, show me how to land the plane. I don't know anything about flying, but like, how do I do it? So that's whatever that thing you're becoming is, that's the thing to listen to. And if it's like, relax, don't manage it, then relax and don't manage it. Yeah. Good. Hey, I appreciate the time, and thanks for your trust in being here. And just feel good about being connected to what we're up to. Well, there's also a free ritual on the summer solstice or winter solstice if you're in the global, geographic south, and that'll be in just, I don't know, 2 weeks or something when solstice happens. So stay connected. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you all.